Welcome into the Bite Meat podcast, and really appreciate you guys joining us every week. Of course, broadcast wherever you get your podcast. If you can get a podcast, you can get the Bite Meat podcast. And very happy, as always, to have another great guest joining us today. Do want to mention, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And certainly brought to you every week by Texas Star Grill Shop, texasstargrillshop.com. A little note on that. It's that time, man. It's that time of year again. Thanksgiving sale is going on, as well as the best place to get your outdoor kitchen taken care of, from design to equipment and everything else that you can imagine. So let's get right to it because we go about 35 minutes or so here, and I don't want to waste a minute with Michael Fulmer from one of the two, as I understand it, founders of the Houston BBQ Festival. If you live in Texas, you've probably been very familiar with the Houston BBQ Festival, and I highly recommend that you go. We're going to get to that in a little bit. But, it's funny because as I talk to people, Michael, first of all, thank you for joining us. But as I talk to people from all over the world, really, we've had, just Priles on, people from Hawaii and Australia and everywhere in between, and some great pitmasters across the country. As you well know, there's always a kind of a recurring theme lately. And that theme is, this ain't your daddy's barbecue in Texas anymore, because back in the day, people would talk about whether it was Lockhart or whatever it might be. That Texas was known in certain places for barbecue. Houston was not on that list, and that's where I want to start, because one of the ways I put it, it's gone from something of an afterthought to a destination, Houston barbecue. And I know we have listeners all over, but they all come through Houston at some point. Texas, a lot of people in Texas love to do the old barbecue tours, etc. So I'm going to start right there. First of all, thank you. And how has the barbecue scene changed in your eyes over the last 10, 15 years?
I mean, I think it really goes back to, you've heard it before, but the Aaron Franklin revolution of what barbecue was and what it has become. And he kind of changed the face, and not only did he change the face of how barbecue was presented and how it was made, but he gave a blueprint for everyone on how to do that. And that began to manifest itself across the state, and certainly in all the cities, and Houston was no less a part of that. I think one of the first guys to really do craft barbecue and take barbecue in Houston to the next level was Greg Gatlin. He had a very small place in the Heights, had like 2 tables. The line moved ever so slowly, but the barbecue was so good. The brisket was of extremely high quality, as were all the proteins. Really paid attention to the sides and to the service. And he was really the first one in Houston, I think, to take it to the next level. And then, it all just the wave began after that. Then it was, we saw Ronnie Killen go back to his roots and open up. And then, Patrick Fee just came in, and then we saw Tejas, and then of course Corkscrew. And then there's just a whole bevy of them. But I think it all goes back to, at least for Texas, and how it really influenced Houston. Ultimately, I would give credit to Aaron Franklin on that. But I would describe Gatlin as being kind of the first guy here in town.
Yeah, it warms my heart to hear you say that, because just about everybody you mentioned, Aaron Franklin and Patrick and Aaron Fegis and, Ronnie Killen, they've all been on this podcast, and we've talked about various techniques and other things. I do need to get Greg Gatlin on at some point, because that's one hole that I haven't filled yet on the podcast. But some factors that, beyond the influencers, some other factors that seem to be, and I'm asking you the question, but it seemed to be the case for me. Houston is such a culinary destination, one of the best places in the world for high-level chefs and restaurants. And, I've traveled a lot. I'm sure you've traveled a lot. People come to Houston and say, all right, we're in Texas. Let's get some barbecue, and I think that had been sort of that pride or competitive nature, maybe chefs, and we know a lot of chefs that have gone into the barbecue world, that raised, what are some other factors that have raised the level of barbecue in this town?
You make some good points in that really dining out and, culinary, excursions is really what the tourism is in this town. I mean, people do not come to Houston for the weather and for the parks, you know. Do we have incredible cultural institutions here, you know, first-rate opera, symphony, and the art scene, you know, the theater? Yes. But, you know, let's face it, like Houston, you know, it's very spread out, it's very sprawling, and it's very hot and humid. And that's problematic for a lot of people who are not, you know, raised in that atmosphere. So what do? You know, and food is a big part of what you do when you're here in Texas. What I do, certainly, you know, I do that wherever I am. But and Houston has just a fantastic first-rate, you know, food scene, and its barbecue scene is no less equal to that kind of moniker. And so we've seen not only just the incredible quality and diversity of the food scene, but that also represents itself in the barbecue scene also. And that's exciting, and it continues to grow and evolve.
Yeah, you mentioned Patrick Feges. Aaron was a chef at the highest level, you know, from New York to Houston and everywhere in between. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and this is so unique to the barbecue world, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself. Barbecue pitmasters and chefs, they love to talk with each other and be friends with each other and share secrets. And we've talked about it here multiple times. But have you noticed that, especially, and I'm going to get into the barbecue festival itself here in a second, but have you noticed that among all the people that you've met?
100%. I mean, I think one of the things that kind of separates Houston from other cities, and I'm not trying to denigrate any other, you know, urban area or, you know, geographical location in their food scene. But, you know, I've worked in the food scene in the restaurant world most of my life. And I've worked in different cities around the country. And Houston just has this really vibrant and cohesive and friendly, you know, dynamic where, you know, you see collaborations all the time. You see pop-ups, you see chefs working together and really just for the sake of curiosity and friendship. And that's just outstanding. You know, in some places, people like chefs and particularly pitmasters work incredibly hard. They work very long hours. And so taking time out to help somebody else out or to work on a collaborative, you know, event is not like a small isolated thing. We see it every year all the time. And whenever I miss one, you know, I sometimes get that FOMO, you know, fear of missing out. But I also know that it's just we're going to see a couple more in the following year, you know, in the coming year. Recently, Blood Brothers did a pop-up with an old friend of theirs, this Vietnamese gentleman who's a chef in Boston, and he came in. They did this collaborative dinner, and it was just fantastic. It was just and you talk about like people having that kind of high-end culinary background entering into the barbecue world. You know, Ronnie Killen was first in his class at Cordon Bleu. Aaron just as you know, was part of the really dynamic scene in New York, and when she came here to town. And she was working at Planck, which is a wine bar up in the Heights, with just one with like a pizza oven and one burner. And she's got some amazing food there. Amazing food. Yeah, she's got mad skill. So when she and Patrick came together, not just romantically, but and when they opened their own place, you know, got married, she is just as much an influence on what they put out as he is, if you know, and that's exciting.
Yeah, and we got a lot more to cover, but I don't want to bury the lead here now. I said 10 or 15 years, you know, it's really been transforming itself, the barbecue scene here in Houston. Well, what happened 15 years ago, if I'm remembering correctly, is the Houston BBQ Festival came on the scene. And correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline, but I know it was around then. What role? I'll put it this way. What goal did you have and what role do you think you've played in what's been going on here?
So Chris Reed and Chris is, you know, he goes by JC Reed. He's the barbecue columnist for the Chronicle now. He and I would, you know, we were doing barbecue road trips across the whole state, sometimes 7, 8, 9, you know, the whole day, sometimes like hitting 8 or 9 places in a day. And sometimes friends would join us, sometimes they wouldn't. And what we found on our journeys was not just this amazing barbecue and somewhat different styles that we tasted, but it was the people. They were just so fantastic and they worked so hard. People don't enter into barbecue because they want to get rich. You know, that's generally not really the byproduct of that. if they can make a living and they can serve their community, that's a win.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to shine a light on these people and say, hey, what can we do to possibly make their life a little better? What can we do to like let people know? And Houston, as you know, is so spread out, and the barbecue scene is so spread out. We were like, let's try to bring these guys together for not only for them but for the city. So it was like the first intent was to, like I said, to put a highlight for these barbecue institutions and to get them more business. But it was also to let people know, like, hey, you can try all these places in one setting. And that was the original goal. And that's still been our mission, is to highlight the Houston barbecue scene. We do occasionally have friends coming in from out of town and out of state. We have Billy Durnian from Hometown Barbecue, Wayne Mueller from Louis Mueller Barbecue, et cetera, et cetera. But we always really want to concentrate on the Houston scene. So when you come to a Houston barbecue event, that's going to be the main focus of it. Mm-hmm. And what we found is when we got these guys together is a lot of them had never even met or talked to each other because they all worked so hard. And who has, like, if you work in 80 hours and you have any free time, are you going to go to another barbecue place? It's highly doubtful. And they suddenly realized, one, they had so much in common. Two, they really liked each other. And three, they were like, they wanted more contact with each other. And so I think that what we initially did really kind of helped serve as a catalyst to that. I'm always reticent to take any kind of credit for anything that's successful or for a scene that has, in some ways evolved. But I really think that was the initial catalyst. And we found that from all of them is that they really had never really talked to each other. They really had no idea. When Russell Regals came to us, he was operating Baker's Ribs, which is originally out of Dallas. Mm-hmm. And once he really pushed us hard to be in the festival. We had tried it and it wasn't very good, but we were like, okay, all right, come on, be part of it. And when he started tasting other people's barbecue, he realized, wow, I gotta step up my game. And he did. He stepped it up so much that the people from Baker's Ribs said, hey, you're changing things and we don't want you to do that. And so he bought his space out and hung his flag out. And next thing you know, Russell Regals makes the top 50 for Texas Monthly and has become just an integral part of the Houston barbecue scene. And as well as someone who, is now teaching other people how he's doing things. I kind of give him big credit on the scene with the whole pastrami, smoked pastrami, and the Reuben sandwich that we see. He's taught several of the pitmasters how to do that. It's become a real staple of the Thursday afternoon and Regals. That I rank that as one of the 10 best sandwiches in this town. Matter of fact, I'm going next week to have it. It's just tremendous. And that is just, I think that's kind of a microcosm of I think what we started, and they just took it and ran with it.
All right. So give us a thumbnail sketch for those who have not been of what to expect at the Houston BBQ Festival and what this latest iteration looked like, how many, how big, et cetera.
So when we started out 15 years ago, I think we had 11 barbecue places. Chris and I really took the long view that we wanted to be around for a long time and that the barbecue vendors were our number one priority. We had to take care of them. And then number two, we wanted it to be a really good experience for the guest. And that is, we've all been to festivals that are clearly going to grab a dollar. You're not going to see them next year. They're poorly run or just the dynamic is not well thought out. And what we did is we took the Texas Monthly. We went to Texas Monthly that first year. We talked with Pat Sharp and we saw what they did and we liked it. And the dynamic is one of you buy a ticket beforehand. And when you come to our festival, you get as many samples from all the barbecue vendors, and you never have to pull out your wallet. You don't have to buy tickets and then change them in, or there's not a cash exchange. You just come there and eat as much as long as you want, until you're full or until they run out. I love it when people cross their arms and like, I'm going to crush you guys. I'm like, good luck. All right, good luck. And that has served us really well. That we, for a long time. For several years, we were at Reliant Stadium because it was centrally located. and that was under the aegis of Aramark. And we found that the guest experience wasn't where we wanted it to be. Mm-hmm. So I found a space up on the northern part of town called the Humble Civic Center. It's literally like 3 minutes off I-59, almost parallel with Intercontinental. And that afforded us an opportunity to lower the prices because we're a family-friendly event, and we want to keep those prices low. And so now people don't pay for parking when they come to our place. If they want a beverage, if they want a beer or a drink and they want to buy, it's affordable. They're not paying $14, $15 like you do at some of these more inner city, events. And so they can bring their family and do that, or they can come with their significant other or their buddies, and it doesn't break the bank. And what was, like I said, 11 places is now over 30. We're turning people away, and we try to accommodate people, but we're limited by what we can do in terms of infrastructure and cost. But it's a great place to be now that, people want to be part of the festival. The festival sells out every year, and it's just a great event. And the bottom line is, we talked about this. Houston is so spread out. So do you want to try Corkscrew up in spring? Do you want to try, Tejas over in Tomball, Fegis in Spring Branch? We're bringing all the, Harlem Road way out, we're bringing all these places together in one spot for people to try them. And, these guys are not phoning it in, especially if you get the VIP ticket, which is just an hour earlier. They really put out some incredible stuff. And it's a great dynamic. And it's this year, once again, will be in April 12th at the Humble Civic Center. We're really conscious also of what weather represents. We can't do it earlier in the year because of the rodeo. That's kind of like the 800-pound gorilla. So we wait a couple of weeks till after it's done. But we're not, we've learned we don't do events outside between May and September. We're in Houston. We're just not going to do it. If it rains, people will cover up. If it's cold, they can put a jacket on, or if it's windy. If it's hot, they get angry at us. They get really angry. And we don't want that. We want it to be a great experience for them. Now, can we control the weather? Of course not. And it is Houston, and weather is a dynamic, but it served us very well to have it early in April, and to price it as we do. So we do a couple of smaller events throughout the year, usually in places like St. Arnold's up in their beer hall. We do the Houston BBQ Throwdown. This past year, we did something called the New Q event, where we invited all these new guys who were mostly doing pop-ups and caterings. None of them were brick and mortar. Really brought it. The year before, we did the Tex-Mex barbecue block party, where all the pitmasters were Latino, and we never tell them what to make ever. Yeah. But I was like, I'll be honest, the first year we did it, I was a little concerned. I'm like, are we going to get 13 places that are doing brisket with a fold over tortilla? It was anything but that. It was just it was one of my favorite events, and the guys were so happy to be a part of it. And, so, you can always look for those smaller events that we do. Those are usually for around 500 people, and those are inside in air conditioning. But the main festival, the engine that drives the train, is the Houston BBQ Festival, and that's in April. And everything's accessible through HOUBBQ.com.
There you go. I was going to ask you about that, but you also touched on something that is leading directly into my next question for you. You're the expert when it comes to this. If you had, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot, what are some trends in not just Houston barbecue, because it clearly reflects the entire state and the entire country? What are some trends you're seeing in barbecue? Because it's not just here's a brisket, here's a piece of sausage anymore.
Yeah, the basic trinity is still the heart and soul, and
right,
what the barbecue experience is. And for those who, just to reiterate, it's brisket, pork ribs, and sausage is the Texas trinity. And if you're going to open a barbecue place, you got to kind of nail that, or certainly it has to be serviceable. And so we still see that honored, and that's a beautiful thing. And mostly in a Central Texas style preparation, as opposed to what we see in West Texas or East Texas and those kind of things. And we're seeing all these different cultures starting to conflate and bring their influences of their heritages and their backgrounds into, the Texas barbecue experience. And that's really exciting. When you see brisket and rice, up around the north side, the Vietnamese gentleman, and the rice is fantastic.
Yeah.
He nails his brisket. Matter of fact, he made the top 50 this year, and deservedly so. He just moved around the corner to a new location, bigger space, bigger dining area. Fantastic. Of course, everyone knows about Blood Brothers, and they're, the kids from A-Leaf who were doing pop-ups. They weren't even looking to open their own place, and there was just so much demand for it. They were like, "Hey, they
Guess
really
we got to do it. Guess we got to do it."
People were like, "Good God, we love this. You have to open," and they did. And to so much acclaim, I always wonder if they signed a deal with the devil, but they definitely earned it. And bringing in their, those Thai sticky ribs, doing those other kind of pop-ups are really exciting. So you going outside of Houston, also seeing, the Ethiopian at Smoke and Ash up in Dallas, KG, of course, famously, and his Egyptian barbecue in Austin, and, a Parish barbecue, which brings that whole Cajun influence also in Austin. It's all happening across the state, mostly in urban areas, because that's the kind of place that's going to support that. It's when you look at some place like Weaver's Barbecue, out in Dayton, man, they are in the middle of nowhere and they are killing it, man. They're doing great. And, it's exciting to see the growth and when Bar A, way up on the north side, up in Montgomery County, and they made the top 50 now. It's people will drive for barbecue. People will wait in line.
Yes.
It's like no other business. If you said, "Hey, we're going to a steakhouse. By the way, you're going to have to wait outside for 45 minutes. Are you okay with that? Are you going to do that?"
No, most people don't anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's and it's kind of unnerving for some people when they come from out of state to see that. And then they, you go to Truth and you wait in line and then you get it and you understand. You also come to understand why is there a line? Why do they run out? Well, barbecue, it has to be cut to order. That's another thing we do at all our events. Everything is cut to order. If you see the places that cut, that cut corners and they pre-slice or they use, briskets from days old, that kind of thing. The higher end places which are using high quality proteins, expensive, briskets, it's a tough time right now with the price of beef. It's a really tough time. And
well, you go ahead.
Briskets become almost a break-even thing, which is a tragedy, in its own right. And I hope we see some changes in that, but there's got to be some education to the general public on why not more than 7-8 years ago, you were looking at around $20 a pound for brisket. And now it's pushing 40.
Yeah. No question. Well, and I think that maybe ties in with something that I've noticed, and I'm guessing you have as well. It doesn't have to be a shack anymore. It's not a roadside or an urban, old house that has 3 rooms and a big pit in the back. These days, it's almost as if the Houston culinary world and having a beautiful place to have a meal is merging with the shack, so to speak. I met you recently at J Bar M. That place is fantastic. It's a beautiful place to go have dinner. Oh, by the way, it's barbecue as well. It's great barbecue. So is that something that maybe ties in with the expense and the experience that people want?
Well, in the case of J Bar, Mr. Toomey, John Toomey there, he's got just a grand old gentleman in his late 90s now. And he made, his fortune through car dealerships and through real estate. And he had owned a barbecue place way back in the 70s. It closed, and it was his dream to do that again. And he had enough capital that he could just kind of throw just a ton of money at it, which if you look at that place, you can see that's exactly what he did. So that's somewhat of an anomaly, the classic story for barbecue and how it evolves is, there's like what I call like the 3 different levels, like the 3 different levels of comedy. There's making your friends and family laugh. There's making strangers laugh. And then there's the 3rd level, which is the big one, making strangers laugh for money. Now transfer that to barbecue. So, to me, like Will and Nicole Buckman are a great example. A guy who was working, had a good job, good benefits, working for a power, utility, but making barbecue on the side. And people were like kind of losing their mind. And you're never really sure until then strangers started going, well, this is really good.
Yeah.
And he took it to the next level, and they opened a little shack, in spring, and it was a shack, it was a little trailer, and he just crushed it. I mean, it was just. Did he start off? Was it like all roses, and in the beginning? No, there was days he sold maybe one, maybe two briskets. He might have been doing 7 or 8, and then he'd take. He wouldn't save, he wouldn't save them for the next day. He would take them to the local fire department or to the police department and said, hey, here's some brisket. And it was fantastic. But, whatever I'm going to serve the next day is going to be a fresh brisket. And eventually it organically grew. People like me and Chris, we brought Allison Cook up there. She lost her mind. She's like, this is fantastic. And the word got out, and so eventually they move to a bigger place. Then they make the top 50. Then they get a Michelin star. So this all took quite a bit of time, but they stayed true to who they were and what their mission was, And I have nothing but incredible respect for them. And I still love going up there to this day. And you'll never see, that place open without, Will Buckman being there, and Nicole runs the back of the house, and they've really learned how to do line management. They do what I consider one of the best jobs of line management. And, as far as I'm concerned, they've earned their plaudits, but that's more of a classic case of how it evolves. And, because of real estate prices, which is probably the biggest decision you have to make when you're going to go into brick and mortar, if you can get that deal. Sometimes it makes sense for barbecue places just to stay as a pop-up. They don't have all these extraneous costs, and they can kind of set their own schedule. It's up to that person whether they want to take it to that level and say, hey, I want to do this 5 days a week, 6 days a week, or, in the case of the pit room, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
One of the few places, one of the few quality places that's open 7 days a week.
Do you think the expense, you mentioned expenses, but do you think the expense of meats is going to be limiting that? I'm a big fan of Logan Glenn up at Space City Barbecue in Baytown, and he's got the pop-up, he's got the trailer, and he's having a lot of success. He was mentioned in Texas Monthly and everything else. And I'm looking at what he does, and I'm like, boy, with these prices, is there going to be a ceiling?
There's always some kind of ceiling. I like what they're doing too. I really like it. I like Space City and Spacecraft, and boy, do I get them confused sometimes. But they're both doing great jobs, and they're both doing it in the kind of trailer pop-up atmosphere. And so there is a ceiling, of course, as to how much you can put out. Like how big is your smoker? How much is your community supporting you? When you look at Baytown, when you look at Missouri City, when you look at Clear Lake, they're definitely underserved areas when it comes to barbecue. Sugarland, most definitely, but that's a different, story altogether. And I think we'll see some real growth out there, and I'm excited to see them out there doing that. But yeah, you are limited, but then it's like you kind of look at, is this their sole source of income? Sometimes it's a side gig. Sometimes, the other thing is that you can control your costs and your labor very easily. You're not working with 8, 9, 10, 20, 30 people. You look at the amount of people that work at Truth Barbecue right now, it's a small army, but when they're doing 70, 80 briskets a day, over 100 briskets on a weekend, and on a holiday weekend, well over 100, as well as supplying for the stadium when they have games and for other events. They were doing Merit Barbecue up in Round Top, but that's ended. All the barbecue for Brenham, is also done. Yeah. And, it's just an incredible feat to put out that kind of product at that kind of quality. So, it's always a personal decision, for people when they're going to take it to the next level. I never say, oh, you need to get bigger. Now, like Terry Black's is an incredible example. They started off big, doing well in Austin for several years. Were they the best? No, but it was a really serviceable, good barbecue that they were able to do high volume and still execute at a pretty good level. And now, like their operations in Dallas are just crushing it. The Lockhart one opened and they're doing great. Waco, you're going to see it open in Houston soon, and I believe in Nashville also. They do high volume at a high quality, at a really good quality, almost better than anyone in terms of like the sheer numbers of what they do. In my eyes.
All right, so let's a couple more things here for you, and again, appreciate you joining us. I think it's been very informative. But The other thing that Houston and Texas has going for it now is awards don't lie, man, and awards get attention. And we're talking. We've always had the Texas Monthly list, but now you're talking Michelin stars. You're talking, various other awards. What is that doing for us as a state and as a city?
It's nothing but great. I mean, anybody who decries when they find out like what the Visitors Bureau. I mean, you have to pay the Michelin people to come to you. They're not going to just reach into their pocket and say, okay, we're going to cover Texas now, and we're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars of our own money. That's not the world we live in anymore. That you've got to bring them. The same thing that happened. We just saw them launch in the South. So Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana. You got to pay them, and it's worth every penny. Mm-hmm. Okay, when you see what it does for the restaurants, restaurants are a huge part of the Texas economy. They're a huge part of employment, and barbecue is certainly at the forefront of that. That to bring more attention to that is nothing but good. So the Texas Monthly list is like, I don't need to tell you, sometimes you can think you might be in a bubble. You're like, do we really care too much about this? I'll talk to guys and we'll sit there and have conversations, ad nauseum about the most minute thing. But people really care about all that stuff. They really care. Mm-hmm. And, what the Texas Monthly Top 50 list has done is fantastic. It's every 4 years. We saw it drop this year. I just was at the festival this past year. A great turnout. And we have our own local lists here. We have the Houston Chronicle Top 100. You'll see several barbecue places listed in there. I guess Culture Map does their Tastemaker Awards. You'll see presented there. But really, Michelin is going to be heads and above all that. And then James Beard, of course.
Yeah.
But James
Beard as well has been mentioned lately.
Right. Like it was back in the day, the old saying, was like the only barbecue place that I really ever got noticed was Louis Mueller. They didn't win in competition, but they were awarded American Classics, many decades ago, back when Bobby ran it. And, since Wayne took it over, and now when Aaron Franklin won the first James Beard Award for Texas, that was a big deal. Then we saw Rodney Scott, win, and you're seeing them, people like Ernest at Burt Bean making in the finalist list, and those are great. But I think what pushes the needle more than anything is Michelin, to be sure, because that's going to bring people from out of state. People know, like people in the food community, they understand James Beard, they know it. Some people out of it do, but Michelin has a very long tenured history and a very respected one. Are they beyond reproach? No, any list is open to subjective analysis.
Of course.
And the fact that they did embrace Texas barbecue, I think is just fantastic and a really good and smart and proper move.
Sure.
We saw the second year, and everyone held on to their star. No new barbecue places got stars on that, although some were added into the recommended and the bib gourmand. And that's a great thing too. And that's, there's so many sites for people to access information about where to dine, whether it's Yelp or Eater or Infatuation, whatever, all the local ones, but Michelin really does push the needle in terms of its, people's respecting it. And so, once again, it's a very long-winded way, which I'm known for.
No, this is good, man. And in fact, I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
And this is going to definitely put you on the spot. But let's say someone is coming into Texas and they want to build the perfect barbecue plate, as in brisket from here, ribs from here, chickens from here, sausage from here, and then sides from here. You've been to probably all of the big ones and many others. I asked this, of the Texas Monthly, guest we had. So just, and I'm not going to hold you to it, but just something that maybe immediately pops into mind. If I'm building a perfect barbecue plate, maybe they're all from the same spot, but like brisket, chicken, ribs, sausage, and sides.
I did something similar with Eric Sandler at Culture Map. We did this draft, people where we all got to choose one from each. You couldn't choose two from the same place, and if someone chose brisket from Truth, you couldn't take it. And I've had this kind of discussion before, and I'm always kind of
No, I
reticent.
know. Yeah.
I'm somewhat reticent in a public forum to say, hey, this is my favorite, because, my part of my job is to support and promote these guys. Okay. You don't want to say, and I don't want to call them my children. That's a bit,
Mhm.
a bit much. But these are all people I know and respect. Now, that being said, I think there's an upper tier that we see on things like brisket, things like and consistency comes as a big part of it.
Mhm.
I've never had nothing less than incredible experiences at Corkscrew and what they do with their brisket. The same thing with Leonard and his team at Truth, just first rate. Also, Ronnie Killen has opened up multiple operations, but what they're doing in Pearland, I've always had a good experience with. I love
That's a good way to do it. Throw some out there.
Yeah, I love the sides. People can't just phone that in anymore.
Mhm.
If you go to some old school places, you'll see some stuff that's like straight out of a Cisco purchase, or it's just really kind of phoned in. But new places, the bar is way too high. You can't do that anymore. So when you get like you mentioned Feegis Barbecue and what Aaron.
That's what I was thinking. See, I'm thinking of all my places in my head, but I want you to say them, because I was thinking.
I love what they do with the elote, with the carrots, with the kale. It's really, really good. And plus, it's a revolving thing. As far as like classic sides, I love what Killen's does on their mac and cheese, and their cream corn is incredible. The coleslaw and Corkscrew. When I think about sausage, man, the sausage game at Tejas is it's just top of the ladder. The Oaxacan, that Oaxacan poblano sausage. I remember all the hype hearing about it. And some of my friends they're kind of losing their mind.
It can't be that good, right? It can't be that good.
Tried it, and I was like, when something gets built up like that, it rarely lives up to it. Yeah. Boy, it lives up to it. Like when I go up there, I also make a point of like you can buy it cryovac and bring it home. I always buy a bunch and bring it back home too. Making your own sausage. Any barbecue place that has the good sense not to make their own sausage, I applaud them, because it's so labor intensive. It's so much time and money. You can create a good recipe, and there's a lot of good packers that can do really good sausage for you. But to commit to that it's taking it to the next level. Tejas does that. The Pit Room. They're 2 different sausages, man. Wow, first place. I think ribs is one of the more forgiving of the proteins, and so you can find good ribs. It's almost an insult when you get bad ribs, but places like Pinkerton's that does wet and dry rub ribs, I don't know any place that does both of them. That's like a must. When I'm with somebody and they're like, "Well, are we going to get it wet or dry?" I just look at them like, "We're getting both."
Yeah,
that's part of my experience. And then I look at this like some of the things that are done off, proteins. What Ara does at Harlem Road, I think is pretty interesting and compelling. It's just a great scene here. And it's ever evolving, and that's exciting. Arash is the new pitmaster at J Bar, and he brings a lot of experience. He worked with Blood Brothers, he worked elsewhere, and he's really stepped up the game there, and that's exciting. When Greg Gatlin does his dirty rice, that's like another thing. I'm at Gatlin's and I'm just stopping by. I'm not even like, I'm just coming by to say hi to Greg or whatever, or give his mom a hug, or she gives me a hug. She's an amazing woman. I'll just get some dirty rice to go because it's just so. And that's just, it's just really, I don't know about you, but like when I travel, I try barbecue everywhere I go. It doesn't matter whether I'm in London or in Maine or in San Francisco. And sometimes places will surprise you. Generally, Central Texas style is the, usually what the greater export that we see the people embracing. Obviously, you're seeing different proteins in different woods. But it's exciting to see the influence of what Texas is now having outside of the state, outside of this country.
Yeah. I mentioned it. We've had some from all over.
Yeah. There was a big event in Dublin about a month ago. They had John Bates from Interstellar, Ernest from Burnt Bean, Ali from La Barbecue, Daniel Vaughn went out there, and they just killed it. And when I talked to them about their experience, they go, "Man, these Irish kids, they can cook." And then
they want to learn. They love the aura, the mystique of Texas barbecue.
Right. And then you look at like someplace in Brazil where there's this incredible tradition of live fire cooking. Slow smoking is is very, very much like indigenous to what, coming from here, and it's been exported. But live fire cooking is something that's embraced all over the world, and seeing, the slow smoking and the different techniques now being embraced in other cultures, or like I said, some of these different Brazilian cuts, man, live fire cooking events in South America, man, they are a scene. They are a big deal.
Awesome.
And it's
awesome.
Exciting. It's really exciting. The
All
future
right,
is
man. The future is very bright. That was the whole gist of this podcast today. Can't thank you enough. That was very informative, and I hope our listeners enjoyed it as much as I did. You guys, don't forget that the podcast is available wherever you get your podcast. We recommend Podbean because you can listen on Podbean to literally every podcast we've ever done. So subscribe there. And other than that, of course, brought to you every week by Texas Star Grill Shop, TexasStarGrillShop.com. You guys have a great week, a great weekend. Smoke it up, and we will talk to you next time.